She was supposed to be gone for 15 minutes. But when they opened that wall, time collapsed. The sledgehammer hit the drywall with a dull thud, sending up a cloud of dust that danced in the afternoon light streaming through the mall's broken skylights. Construction worker Miguel Santos had been demolishing interior walls for 3 days now, working methodically through what had once been Riverside Mall's bustling food court. The building had been dead for 7 years, its storefronts boarded up, its fountains dry, its corridors echoing with nothing but the scurrying of rats and the distant hum of machinery. But on this Tuesday morning in March 2025, Miguel's sledgehammer broke through more than just plaster and insulation. As the wall crumbled away, something small and leather tumbled out from the cavity between the studs, hitting the dusty tile floor with a soft thump that seemed to echo through the empty space like a whisper from the past. Miguel set down his sledgehammer and crouched beside the object. It was a purse, small, purple, with a silver chain strap that had tarnished with age. The leather was stiff and cracked, covered in a fine layer of dust that spoke of years hidden in darkness. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, some instinct telling him that this was more than just forgotten debris. Inside the purse, Miguel found items that made his breath catch in his throat. $23 in cash, bills that looked crisp despite their age, with serial numbers that would later be traced to 2007. A friendship bracelet woven from pink and blue thread, the kind that teenage girls made for each other during lazy summer afternoons. A lip balm, barely used. A folded piece of paper with a name written in careful cursive. David Kellerman. But it was the small plastic student ID card that made Miguel's hands shake as he held it up to the light. The photo showed a young girl with bright eyes and a genuine smile, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. The name on the card read, Sarah Michelle Chen, age 13, Riverside Middle School. Miguel had lived in Riverside his entire life. He knew that name. Everyone in town knew that name. Sarah Chen was the girl who had vanished 18 years ago. The girl who had walked into this very mall on a hot July afternoon and never walked out. The girl whose disappearance had torn the community apart and left a family destroyed by grief and unanswered questions. As Miguel stared at the ID card, the silence of the empty mall seemed to press in around him. Somewhere in the distance, a piece of loose metal creaked in the wind. The sound echoed through the corridors like a sob, and Miguel realized he was looking at evidence from a case that had haunted Riverside for nearly 2 decades. He reached for his phone with trembling fingers, his voice barely steady as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher. I need to report a discovery. I think I found something that belongs to Sarah Chen. The dispatcher's sharp intake of breath told Miguel that even after all these years, that name still had the power to stop hearts in Riverside. Within minutes, the abandoned mall would be swarming with police cars, their red and blue lights painting the cracked parking lot in colors that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a town's collective memory. But before the chaos arrived, Miguel stood alone in the dusty food court, holding a purple purse that had somehow survived 18 years hidden in a wall. He found himself thinking about the girl in the photograph, about the life that had been cut short in this very building, about the family who had never stopped wondering what happened to their daughter. In the silence of the abandoned mall, it felt as though Sarah Chen's ghost was finally ready to tell her story. Sarah Michelle Chen had been 13 years old when she disappeared, a girl caught between childhood and adolescence, in that awkward, beautiful way that makes parents simultaneously proud and terrified. She lived with her parents, David and Linda Chen, in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, just a 15-minute walk from Riverside Mall. Their home was filled with the comfortable chaos of a family with an only child. School art projects stuck to the refrigerator, a pile of library books by Sarah's bedroom door, and the ever-present sound of her practicing violin in the living room. David Chen worked as an accountant at a local firm, a quiet man who showed his love through small gestures, packing his daughter's lunch every morning helping her with math homework at the kitchen table, saving his spare change in a jar so Sarah could buy books or CDs she wanted. Linda taught 4th grade at Riverside Elementary, and neighbors often saw her in the front yard with Sarah, planting flowers or raking leaves, their laughter carrying across the quiet street. Sarah was the kind of teenager who still held her parents' hands when they walked through the mall together, who left handmade cards on their pillows on random Tuesday nights, who would curl up between them on the couch for family movie nights. She had a small group of close friends at school, played violin in the junior orchestra, and had recently developed an obsession with photography, carrying around a digital camera that had been a birthday gift from her grandmother. The summer of 2007 had been particularly hot in Riverside, with temperatures climbing into the high 90s day after day. Sarah had been out of school for 3 weeks, spending her days reading in the air-conditioned library, hanging out at friends' houses, and begging her parents to drive her to the mall where she could escape the heat and window shop with her allowance money. On July 15, 2007, Sarah woke up to another sweltering day. She had spent the morning reading on the back porch, a glass of ice water sweating on the table beside her, when the craving hit. It was the kind of sudden, intense desire that only teenagers can feel. She wanted ice cream, specifically the cookie dough flavor from Scoops, the small ice cream shop in the mall's food court. Linda Chen was in the middle of grading summer school papers when Sarah appeared in the doorway of her home office, camera hanging around her neck, a hopeful smile on her face. "Mom, can I go to the mall? I want to get ice cream and maybe take some pictures for my portfolio." Linda looked up from her papers, noting the flush of heat on her daughter's cheeks. The mall was a familiar destination. Sarah had been going there with friends since she was 11, and it was considered safe by Riverside standards. The food court was always busy. The security guards knew Sarah by sight, and she had never given her parents any reason to worry. "Take $20 from my purse," Linda said, returning to her grading, "and be back by 4 o'clock. Dad's making his famous stir-fry for dinner." Sarah kissed her mother's cheek and grabbed the money, adding it to the $3 she already had in her purple purse. She called out a goodbye to her father, who was mowing the lawn, and set off down Maple Street toward the mall, her camera bouncing against her chest as she walked. It was 2:47 p.m. when Sarah Chen walked out of her family's house for the last time. Security footage would later show her entering Riverside Mall at exactly 3:03 p.m., her ponytail swinging as she walked through the main entrance, a slight smile on her face as she waved to Jerry Martinez, the security guard who had worked there for 6 years and always asked about her violin lessons. She looked happy. She looked normal. She looked like any other teenager spending a summer afternoon at the mall. But Sarah Chen would never make it home for her father's stir-fry dinner. She would never again practice violin in the living room, never leave another handmade card on her parents' pillows, never grow up to become the photographer she dreamed of being. Because somewhere in the maze of corridors and service hallways that made up Riverside Mall, something went terribly wrong, and for 18 years, the building kept its secrets buried behind walls and hidden in shadows, while a family slowly broke apart from the weight of not knowing. The mall security footage from July 15, 2007, would become some of the most analyzed video evidence in Riverside Police Department history. Detective Ray Morrison, who had been assigned to the case, would spend hours studying every frame, looking for clues that might have been missed in the initial investigation. The footage showed Sarah entering the mall at 3:03 p.m. through the main entrance, her purple purse slung over her shoulder, her camera around her neck. She walked with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going, stopping briefly to look at a display in the window of Claire's accessories before continuing toward the food court. At 3:07 p.m., Sarah appeared on the food court cameras, approaching the counter at Scoops with a smile. The teenage employee, Marcus Webb, would later tell police that Sarah had ordered a single scoop of cookie dough ice cream in a waffle cone, paying with a $10 bill and leaving the change as a tip. She had seemed perfectly normal, maybe a little excited about something, but nothing that had raised any red flags. The last clear image of Sarah Chen was captured at 3:11 p.m. by a camera positioned near the food court seating area. She was sitting at a small table eating her ice cream and fiddling with her camera, apparently reviewing photos she had taken earlier. The image was grainy, but Sarah's expression looked content, relaxed, like any other teenager enjoying a summer treat. After 3:11 p.m., Sarah Chen seemed to vanish from the mall's surveillance system entirely. Despite having cameras positioned throughout the building, covering every exit and most of the main corridors, there was no footage of Sarah leaving her table, no image of her walking toward any exit, no record of her leaving the building. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. When Sarah didn't return home by 4 p.m., Linda Chen felt the first flutter of worry. Sarah was usually punctual, and David had already started preparing dinner. Linda called her daughter's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again at 4:30, then 5, each unanswered call sending her anxiety climbing higher. By 6:00 p.m., David and Linda were in the car, driving to the mall with a growing sense of dread. They found Jerry Martinez, the security guard, who remembered seeing Sarah enter the building but hadn't noticed her leave. He offered to check the security footage, and within minutes, they were huddled in the mall's security office, watching their daughter eat ice cream on a grainy monitor. "She's right there," Linda whispered, pointing at the screen. "She's right there, so where did she go?" Jerry fast-forwarded through the footage, showing them camera after camera, but Sarah never appeared again. It was as if she had simply vanished from the food court table, leaving behind only a growing puddle of melted ice cream and a mystery that would consume the Chen family for years to come. The official missing person report was filed at 8:43 p.m. on July 15, 2007. By midnight, the mall was crawling with police officers, search dogs, and volunteers from the community. They searched every store, every bathroom, every utility closet. They interviewed every employee who had been working that day, every customer who could be identified from the security footage. But Sarah Chen was nowhere to be found. The search for Sarah Chen became the largest missing person investigation in Riverside's history. Detective Ray Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the force, assembled a task force that included officers from 3 neighboring counties, FBI agents specializing in missing children cases, and volunteer search teams that combed through every park, every wooded area, every abandoned building within a 50-mile radius of the mall. The Chen family's house became a command center of sorts, with phone lines set up to handle tips, volunteers organizing search parties, and media representatives camping out on the front lawn. David and Linda Chen aged years in the space of days, their faces drawn with exhaustion and terror as they made televised pleas for their daughter's safe return. The first weeks of the investigation focused on the most likely scenarios: that Sarah had been abducted by a stranger, possibly someone who had followed her from the mall to the parking lot, or that she had run away from home for reasons her parents couldn't understand. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the case began to take on a different character. Rumors started circulating through Riverside like poison. Some people whispered that Sarah had been involved with an older man, that she had been secretly planning to run away. Others suggested that the Chen family was hiding something, that there were dark secrets behind their seemingly perfect facade. The small town that had initially rallied around the missing girl and her family slowly began to fracture under the weight of suspicion and fear. The mall itself became a focal point of the investigation. Detective Morrison and his team interviewed every employee, from the teenage workers in the food court to the maintenance staff who had access to the building's service areas. They studied the mall's layout, mapping every corridor, every storage room, every possible hiding place where a 13-year-old girl might have been taken. The building's architecture was more complex than it appeared to casual shoppers. Beneath the gleaming storefronts and polished floors was a maze of service corridors, utility tunnels, and maintenance areas that allowed staff to move through the building without being seen by customers. These areas were typically locked and accessible only to authorized personnel, But the investigation revealed that security protocols were often lax, with doors left propped open and keys shared informally among staff members. One area of particular interest was the maintenance corridor that ran behind the food court. This hallway provided access to the building's electrical systems, plumbing, and HVAC equipment, and it connected to a network of similar corridors throughout the mall. The space was cramped and poorly lit, filled with pipes and electrical conduits that created dozens of potential hiding spots. But despite extensive searches of these areas, no trace of Sarah Chen was found. No clothing, no personal belongings, no evidence that she had ever been in the maintenance corridors at all. The mall's security logs showed no unusual activity that day, no unauthorized access to restricted areas, no alarms triggered in the service corridors. As the investigation stretched into its third month, Detective Morrison began to suspect that Sarah Chen was no longer alive. The complete absence of any evidence, the lack of ransom demands or credible sightings, and the sheer impossibility of a 13-year-old girl vanishing so completely from a public place all pointed to a tragic conclusion. But without a body, without witnesses, without any concrete evidence of foul play, the case remained technically a missing person investigation. The FBI gradually reduced their involvement, the volunteer search teams dispersed, and the media attention moved on to other stories. By the first anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, the investigation had been relegated to a single detective working part-time on cold cases. The Chen family never stopped looking for their daughter. David Chen would drive to the mall every Saturday morning, walking through the corridors with missing person flyers, asking the same questions of the same employees, hoping that someone might remember something new. Linda Chen became involved with support groups for families of missing children, channeling her grief into advocacy work while clinging to the hope that Sarah might still be found alive. But as years passed, that hope became increasingly difficult to maintain. The Chen family's marriage, which had been strong before Sarah's disappearance, began to crack under the strain of constant grief and uncertainty. David became obsessed with the case, spending hours online researching similar disappearances, corresponding with psychics and conspiracy theorists who claimed to have information about Sarah's fate. Linda withdrew into herself, unable to bear the constant reminders of her daughter's absence. By 2010, 3 years after Sarah's disappearance, David and Linda Chen had separated. David moved into a small apartment across town, surrounding himself with boxes of case files and newspaper clippings about missing children. Linda remained in the family home, unable to bring herself to pack away Sarah's belongings, leaving her daughter's room exactly as it had been on July 15, 2007. The community of Riverside, meanwhile, slowly began to forget. New families moved into the neighborhood. New students enrolled at Riverside Middle School, and the story of Sarah Chen became something that older residents whispered about to newcomers, a cautionary tale about the dangers that could lurk even in the safest-seeming places. The mall itself began to decline in the years following Sarah's disappearance. Whether due to changing shopping habits, economic pressures, or the lingering stigma of the unsolved case, foot traffic steadily decreased. Stores began closing, their windows papered over with "For Lease" signs. The food court, once bustling with teenagers and families, became a ghost town of empty tables and shuttered restaurants. By 2015, Riverside Mall was more than half empty. The remaining stores struggled to stay afloat, and the building's owners began cutting costs wherever possible. Security was reduced to a single guard during business hours, maintenance was deferred, and large sections of the mall were simply closed off to the public. The building began to physically deteriorate. Ceiling tiles sagged from water damage, the fountains were drained and filled with trash, and the once bright corridor lighting was replaced with harsh fluorescent bulbs that cast sickly shadows on the cracked tile floors. The mall that had once been the heart of Riverside's social life became a monument to decay and lost hopes. In 2018, 11 years after Sarah Chen's disappearance, Riverside Mall officially closed its doors. The last few remaining stores held going-out-of-business sales, and the building was abandoned to the elements. Homeless individuals began using the service corridors as shelter. Teenagers broke in to use the space for parties and vandalism, and urban explorers documented the mall's decline in haunting photographs that circulated online. The building stood empty for 7 years, slowly succumbing to neglect and vandalism. Windows were broken, graffiti covered the walls, and vegetation began growing through cracks in the foundation. The mall that had once been a symbol of suburban prosperity became a reminder of economic decline and lost community. But in 2025, a technology company called Riverside Innovation Hub purchased the abandoned mall with plans to transform it into a modern office complex. The renovation would be extensive, requiring the complete gutting of the interior and the installation of new systems throughout the building. It was an ambitious project that promised to bring new life to the abandoned space and create hundreds of jobs for the community. Miguel Santos was part of the construction crew tasked with the mall's transformation. He had worked in construction for 15 years, and he was accustomed to the strange discoveries that old buildings could yield. Forgotten time capsules, hidden bottles of liquor, love letters tucked behind walls. But nothing had prepared him for what he found in the wall behind the old food court. The discovery of Sarah Chen's purse sent shockwaves through Riverside. Detective Ray Morrison, now in his final year before retirement, was called back to active duty to reopen the case. The FBI returned to town, and the media descended on the quiet community like a swarm of locusts, eager to cover the latest development in a case that had captivated the region 18 years earlier. Linda Chen, now working as a high school counselor in a neighboring town, received the call from Detective Morrison on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the middle of helping a student with college applications when her phone rang, and Morrison's familiar voice on the other end made her legs go weak. "Linda, we've found Sarah's purse," he said gently. "There's been a development in the case." Linda Chen had imagined this moment thousands of times over the years. The phone call that would finally provide answers about her daughter's fate. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The way hope and dread could exist simultaneously in her chest. The way 18 years of grief could come rushing back in a single instant. David Chen was harder to reach. He had moved to Florida after the divorce, working as a freelance bookkeeper and living in a small apartment near the beach. He had never remarried, never had other children, and had spent the intervening years trying to build a life that didn't revolve around his daughter's disappearance. When Detective Morrison finally reached him, David's first words were, "Did you find her? Did you find Sarah?" The answer was more complicated than either parent had expected. The purse contained not just Sarah's belongings, but also the mysterious note with the name David Kellerman, written in careful cursive. The handwriting analysis would take time, but the paper itself was consistent with the type used in school notebooks in 2007. The ink hadn't faded significantly, suggesting that the note had been protected from light and air for years. More intriguingly, the purse had been found in a wall that, according to the mall's original blueprints, should have been solid. The architectural plans showed no maintenance access in that area, no utility lines that would have required an opening in the wall. Yet the purse had been found in a cavity that seemed to have been deliberately created. Detective Morrison assembled a new task force, this time including forensic specialists, architectural experts, and cold case investigators with experience in similar disappearances. The abandoned mall was treated as a crime scene, with yellow tape cordoning off large sections of the building and investigators methodically documenting every inch of the space. The first major breakthrough came when forensic specialists discovered that the wall where Sarah's purse had been found contained microscopic traces of concrete dust that didn't match the original construction materials. The dust was consistent with concrete used in the late 1990s, suggesting that the wall had been modified or repaired sometime after the mall's original construction. Further investigation revealed that the space behind the wall was actually part of a maintenance corridor that had been sealed off in 1998, following a renovation of the food court. The corridor had originally provided access to electrical and plumbing systems, but when the food court was updated, the access point was closed off and the corridor was essentially abandoned. The revelation meant that there was an entire network of forgotten spaces within the mall. Corridors and rooms that didn't appear on current building plans, areas that had been sealed off and forgotten by building management, but might still be accessible to someone who knew they existed. As investigators began the painstaking process of mapping these hidden spaces, they discovered that the maintenance corridor, where Sarah's purse had been found, connected to a larger network of service tunnels that ran throughout the mall. These tunnels provided access to every major area of the building, including the food court where Sarah had last been seen. The discovery of the hidden corridors led to a chilling realization. Someone with knowledge of the mall's architecture could have accessed these spaces without being detected by security cameras or casual observers. The tunnels were like a secret highway running through the building, invisible to shoppers and employees, but providing complete access to anyone who knew how to navigate them. The investigation now focused on identifying who might have had access to these hidden areas. Detective Morrison and his team compiled a list of everyone who had worked on the mall's construction and renovation projects over the years, paying particular attention to those who had been employed during the 1998 food court renovation when the maintenance corridor was sealed. They also began looking more closely at the mall's security and maintenance staff from 2007. People who would have had legitimate reasons to access service areas and who might have discovered the hidden corridors during their regular duties. The name David Kellerman from the note found in Sarah's purse became a crucial piece of the puzzle. A search of employment records from 2007 revealed that no one by that name had worked at the mall, but investigators expanded their search to include contractors, delivery drivers, and anyone who might have had regular access to the building. The breakthrough came when Detective Morrison decided to search not just official employment records, but also Social Security Administration databases and tax records. The search revealed that David Kellerman had indeed worked in Riverside in 2007, but not as a mall employee. He had been employed by Riverside Security Solutions, a company that provided contract security services to various businesses throughout the region. Further investigation revealed that Riverside Security Solutions had held a contract with the mall from 2005 to 2009, providing additional security during busy periods like back-to-school shopping and the Christmas season. David Kellerman had been one of several part-time security guards who worked at the mall on weekends and during holiday rushes. The discovery sent investigators racing to locate David Kellerman, but they quickly hit a roadblock. According to official records, David Kellerman had died in a car accident in 2019, 12 years after Sarah's disappearance. The timing seemed suspicious, but the accident had been thoroughly investigated by state police and appeared to be genuinely accidental. However, the investigation into Kellerman's background revealed disturbing information. Neighbors at his last known address described him as a quiet man who had kept to himself, but several mentioned that he had seemed obsessed with local news stories about missing children. His landlord recalled that Kellerman had kept newspaper clippings and photographs related to missing person cases, though the landlord had assumed it was just a morbid fascination with true crime. More troubling was the discovery that Kellerman had quit his job at Riverside Security Solutions abruptly in August 2007, just 3 weeks after Sarah's disappearance. His supervisor had noted in his personnel file that Kellerman had seemed increasingly agitated and paranoid in the weeks leading up to his resignation, and that he had made several comments about feeling watched and followed. As investigators delved deeper into Kellerman's background, they uncovered a pattern of behavior that suggested he might have been capable of harming Sarah Chen. He had been fired from a previous security job for inappropriate behavior around female employees, and he had been arrested twice for stalking, though the charges had been dropped both times when the victims declined to press charges. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been deeply disturbed, with a particular fixation on young women and an intimate knowledge of the mall's security systems and hidden spaces. His access to the building, combined with his knowledge of the sealed maintenance corridors, made him a prime suspect in Sarah's disappearance. But David Kellerman was dead, and with him had died the possibility of getting answers about what had happened to Sarah Chen. The investigation seemed to have reached another dead end, until forensic specialists made a discovery that changed everything. While processing the purse for evidence, crime scene technicians had discovered a partial fingerprint on the note with Kellerman's name. The print was small and smudged, but it was clear enough to run through fingerprint databases. The results were shocking. The fingerprint belonged to Sarah Chen herself. The revelation meant that Sarah had handled the note, that she had known about David Kellerman's existence and had written down his name for some reason. The handwriting analysis confirmed that the note had been written by Sarah, but the circumstances under which she had written it remained a mystery. Detective Morrison theorized that Sarah might have learned Kellerman's name during her final hours, perhaps when he introduced himself or when she overheard someone else mention it. The note might have been an attempt to leave evidence of her captor's identity, a desperate message written in the hope that someone would eventually find it and understand what had happened to her. But the note raised as many questions as it answered. Why had Sarah written down Kellerman's name? How had she learned it? And most importantly, where was Sarah herself? The investigation now focused on the possibility that Sarah's remains might still be hidden somewhere in the mall's network of sealed corridors and forgotten spaces. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to scan the building's foundation, and cadaver dogs were used to search areas that human investigators couldn't access. The search was painstaking and emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. David and Linda Chen had both returned to Riverside for the investigation, staying in separate hotels but united in their desperate hope for answers. They visited the mall daily, walking through the corridors where their daughter had last been seen, trying to imagine what her final hours had been like. The breakthrough came during the third week of the expanded search. Cadaver dogs had been working their way through the mall's basement level, searching areas that had been used for storage and mechanical systems. In a forgotten corner of the building, behind a maintenance panel that had been painted over multiple times, the dogs detected something that made their handlers immediately call for backup. The panel opened onto a small storage room that didn't appear on any building plans. The space was cramped and windowless, with concrete walls and a floor that had been covered with industrial carpet. But it was what investigators found in that room that finally provided the answers the Chen family had been seeking for 18 years. Sarah Chen's remains were found in the far corner of the hidden room, her body positioned in a way that suggested she had been placed there carefully rather than simply discarded. She was still wearing the clothes she had been wearing the day she disappeared, a yellow t-shirt and blue jeans that her mother had helped her pick out that morning. Nearby, investigators found additional evidence that painted a horrifying picture of Sarah's final hours. There were restraints that had been anchored to the concrete walls, suggesting that she had been held in the room for some time before her death. There was also a small notebook, its pages filled with David Kellerman's handwriting, documenting what he had done to Sarah and expressing his intentions to keep her in the hidden room permanently. The notebook revealed that Kellerman had been watching Sarah for weeks before her disappearance, learning her routines and planning his opportunity. He had used his knowledge of the mall's security systems to avoid the cameras and his access to the hidden corridors to transport Sarah to the concealed room without being detected. The entries in the notebook were disturbing and detailed, describing not just the physical aspects of Sarah's captivity, but also Kellerman's psychological state during the weeks that followed her disappearance. He had written about visiting the hidden room daily, about his growing paranoia as the investigation intensified, and about his eventual decision to seal the room completely to hide the evidence of his crimes. The final entry in the notebook was dated August 15, 2007, exactly 1 month after Sarah's disappearance, and just days before Kellerman quit his job at the security company. In it, he wrote about his intention to leave Riverside and start a new life somewhere else, away from the investigation and the constant reminders of what he had done. The notebook also contained references to other young women Kellerman had been watching, suggesting that Sarah might not have been his only victim. Detective Morrison immediately began investigating these references, working with law enforcement agencies in other jurisdictions to determine if Kellerman might have been responsible for additional crimes. But for the Chen family, the most important discovery was not the evidence of Kellerman's guilt, but the simple fact that they finally knew what had happened to their daughter. After 18 years of wondering, of hoping, of imagining scenarios both better and worse than the truth, they finally had answers. The discovery of Sarah's body allowed the Chen family to begin the process of grieving that had been interrupted by her disappearance. They held a funeral service at the same church where Sarah had been baptized, and she was buried in Riverside Cemetery under a headstone that read simply, Sarah Michelle Chen, Beloved Daughter, 1993-2007. The service was attended by hundreds of people, including classmates who had grown up and started families of their own, teachers who had never forgotten their missing student, and members of the community who had participated in the search efforts years earlier. Detective Morrison spoke at the service, praising Sarah's courage in leaving behind the note that had ultimately led to the solving of her case. But even as the Chen family found some measure of closure, the investigation into David Kellerman continued. The references in his notebook to other potential victims led police to reopen several cold cases involving missing women in the region. DNA evidence from the hidden room was compared to samples from unsolved crimes, and investigators began the process of determining whether Kellerman might have been responsible for additional disappearances. The mall itself was demolished 6 months after Sarah's body was found. The technology company that had purchased the building decided that the site was too associated with tragedy to serve as a modern office complex, and the entire structure was razed to make way for a memorial park dedicated to Sarah's memory. The park features a small playground, walking paths lined with flowers, and a central memorial stone that bears Sarah's photograph and a quote from her middle school yearbook. Life is like a camera. Focus on what's important. Capture the good times, develop from the negatives, and if things don't work out, take another shot. The memorial park became a place where the community could come together to remember Sarah and to reflect on the importance of protecting children from those who would harm them. It also served as a reminder of the dedication of the investigators who had never given up on solving the case, and of the power of hope to sustain families through even the darkest of times. For Linda Chen, the discovery of Sarah's body marked the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. She left her job as a high school counselor to become a full-time advocate for missing children, working with families who were experiencing the same nightmare she had lived through for 18 years. David Chen returned to Riverside permanently, selling his Florida apartment and moving back into the house on Maple Street, where he and Sarah had lived together. He converted Sarah's room into a home office, where he volunteers with missing children organizations, using his accounting skills to help with fundraising and administrative tasks. The Chen family's story became a symbol of resilience and hope for other families dealing with missing loved ones. They spoke at conferences and support group meetings, sharing their experience and offering comfort to others who were walking the same difficult path. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's case led to significant changes in how missing children investigations are conducted. The discovery of the hidden spaces within the mall highlighted the importance of thoroughly examining building plans and architectural records when searching for missing persons. Police departments across the country began incorporating architectural specialists into their investigation teams, and new protocols were developed for searching complex buildings with hidden or forgotten spaces. The case also led to improvements in mall security systems and protocols. The revelation that David Kellerman had been able to access restricted areas so easily prompted a review of security procedures at shopping centers nationwide. New standards were implemented requiring better control of access to service areas and more comprehensive background checks for security personnel. As the years passed, Sarah's story became part of Riverside's collective memory, a reminder of both the fragility of life and the importance of community vigilance. The memorial park where the mall once stood became a gathering place for families, a symbol of hope rising from tragedy, and a testament to a young girl whose life, though cut short, had ultimately made the world a safer place for other children. The investigation into David Kellerman's other potential victims continued for years, with law enforcement agencies from multiple states working together to examine cold cases that might be connected to his crimes. While no definitive links were established to other disappearances, the investigation led to the resolution of several unrelated cases and provided closure to additional families who had been waiting for answers. Detective Ray Morrison retired soon after Sarah's case was closed, but he continued to work as a consultant on missing children cases. He often spoke about Sarah's investigation as the most important case of his career, not just because of its complexity, but because of the reminder it provided about the importance of never giving up hope. The story of Sarah Chen's disappearance and the 18-year search for answers became the subject of documentaries, books, and television specials. But for those who knew her personally, Sarah was never just a true crime story or a cautionary tale. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman whose life had been filled with promise and potential. In the end, Sarah Chen's legacy was not defined by how she died, but by how she lived and by the changes her story inspired. The memorial park that bears her name serves as a reminder that, even in the darkest of circumstances, hope can survive. Truth can eventually emerge, and communities can come together to protect their most vulnerable members. The girl who had left home for ice cream on a hot July afternoon in 2007 had been gone for 18 years, but her story had finally found its voice through the walls that had kept her secret for so long. In the months following the discovery, as investigators continued to piece together the final details of Sarah's case, a troubling pattern began to emerge from David Kellerman's background. The notebook found in the hidden room contained more than just accounts of Sarah's captivity. It revealed a methodical mind that had been planning and fantasizing about such crimes for years. Detective Morrison's team discovered that Kellerman had been keeping detailed surveillance notes on multiple young women in the Riverside area, documenting their routines, their habits, and their vulnerabilities. Sarah had not been a random victim. She had been specifically targeted because of her regular visits to the mall, her predictable schedule, and her tendency to visit the food court alone. The notebook entries revealed that Kellerman had been watching Sarah for at least 6 weeks before her disappearance. He had learned that she typically visited the mall on weekend afternoons, that she favored the ice cream shop in the food court, and that she often sat alone at the small tables while eating her treats. He had even noted which security cameras had blind spots and which areas of the mall were less heavily monitored. The level of premeditation was chilling. Kellerman had not acted on impulse. He had carefully planned every aspect of Sarah's abduction, from the timing of his approach to the route he would take to transport her to the hidden room. The notebook contained detailed diagrams of the mall's layout, including the sealed maintenance corridors that he had discovered during his work as a security guard. Even more disturbing was the revelation that Kellerman had been experimenting with accessing the hidden areas of the mall for months before Sarah's disappearance. He had discovered that the maintenance corridor behind the food court could be accessed through a loose panel in a supply closet, and he had gradually prepared the hidden room as a place where he could hold someone captive without being detected. The room itself bore evidence of this preparation. Investigators found that Kellerman had installed soundproofing materials on the walls, brought in a small portable heater and battery-powered lights, and stocked the space with food and water. The restraints that had been used to hold Sarah were professionally installed, suggesting that Kellerman had taken considerable time to prepare the space for his intended crime. The psychological profile that emerged from the notebook and physical evidence painted a picture of a man who had been consumed by violent fantasies for years before acting on them. Kellerman had written extensively about his desire to collect young women, to keep them in spaces where they would be entirely dependent on him for survival. The entries also revealed his growing frustration with what he perceived as rejection and dismissal from women in his daily life. He had been fired from multiple jobs for inappropriate behavior toward female co-workers, and he had been rejected by several women he had attempted to date. His writing suggested that he saw his actions as a form of revenge against a world that had failed to appreciate his worth. But perhaps most disturbing was the evidence that Kellerman had been planning to expand his activities beyond Sarah. The notebook contained references to other potential victims, including detailed surveillance notes on 3 other young women in the Riverside area. Police immediately reached out to these women, all of whom were now adults, but had been teenagers in 2007. The women's accounts provided additional insight into Kellerman's behavior in the months leading up to Sarah's disappearance. 2 of them reported that they had noticed a man following them or appearing repeatedly in places where they spent time. One woman, who had been 16 in 2007, recalled feeling uncomfortable about a security guard at the mall who always seemed to be watching her when she visited with friends. The third woman, now a mother of 2 living in another state, provided the most chilling account. She had been working at a restaurant near the mall during the summer of 2007, and she remembered David Kellerman as a customer who had made her uncomfortable with his persistent questions about her schedule and his attempts to engage her in personal conversations. She had mentioned his behavior to her manager, who had spoken to Kellerman about keeping his interactions with staff professional. The woman's account suggested that Kellerman had been actively seeking opportunities to interact with young women, gathering information about their routines and vulnerabilities. The fact that he had been targeting multiple potential victims simultaneously indicated that Sarah's abduction was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of predatory behavior. The investigation also revealed that Kellerman had been in contact with online communities devoted to discussing kidnapping and captivity fantasies. Computer equipment seized from his apartment after his death in 2019 contained evidence of his participation in forums where individuals shared detailed plans for abducting and holding victims captive. These online activities provided additional context for understanding Kellerman's mindset and methods. He had been learning from others who shared his disturbing interests, refining his techniques, and building his confidence in his ability to carry out his plans without being caught. The discovery of these online connections led to a broader investigation that ultimately resulted in the arrest of several individuals in other states who had been planning similar crimes. Sarah's case, tragic as it was, had provided law enforcement with valuable intelligence about a network of predators who had been using the internet to share information and encourage each other's criminal activities. As the investigation continued, Detective Morrison and his team began to understand just how close Kellerman had come to claiming additional victims. The timing of his resignation from the security company in August 2007 appeared to have been motivated not just by paranoia about the investigation into Sarah's disappearance, but also by his realization that the increased security measures at the mall would make it difficult for him to access the hidden areas where he had been planning to hold future victims. The notebook contained entries expressing his frustration with the intensified police presence at the mall, and his concern that his access to the maintenance corridors might be discovered. He had written about his intention to find a new location where he could continue his activities, and investigators found evidence that he had been scouting other buildings in the area for potential hiding places. The realization that Kellerman had been planning to continue his crimes in other locations led to a multi-state investigation of his activities after leaving Riverside. Police departments in the 3 states where he had lived after 2007 began reviewing unsolved missing person cases, looking for any connections to Kellerman's presence in their jurisdictions. While no definitive links were established to other disappearances, the investigation did uncover evidence that Kellerman had been continuing his pattern of surveillance and stalking behavior. Neighbors in each of the places where he had lived reported seeing him watching local parks and schools, and several women came forward with accounts of feeling that they were being followed by a man matching Kellerman's description. The investigation also revealed that Kellerman had been seeking employment in positions that would give him access to vulnerable individuals. After leaving Riverside, he had worked at various times as a maintenance worker at a community college, a security guard at a hospital, and a custodian at a shopping center. In each case, he had been fired or had quit under suspicious circumstances related to inappropriate behavior toward female staff members or customers. The pattern suggested that Kellerman had been actively seeking opportunities to identify and observe potential victims, using his legitimate employment as cover for his predatory activities. The fact that he had been able to move from job to job without his previous behavior being reported to subsequent employers highlighted significant gaps in background check procedures and information sharing among employers. Sarah's case ultimately led to legislative changes designed to address these gaps. New laws were passed requiring employers to report incidents of stalking or inappropriate behavior toward coworkers, and background check procedures were enhanced to include screening for patterns of predatory behavior. The Chen family became advocates for these changes, working with legislators and law enforcement officials to develop policies that would make it more difficult for predators like David Kellerman to move freely between communities and employers. Their efforts helped establish new protocols for sharing information about potentially dangerous individuals and created requirements for more thorough screening of employees who would have access to vulnerable populations. But even as the broader implications of Sarah's case continued to unfold, the Chen family remained focused on honoring their daughter's memory and finding ways to help other families avoid the nightmare they had endured. Linda Chen established the Sarah Chen Foundation, which provides support services to families of missing children and funds research into improved investigative techniques. The foundation's work led to the development of new technologies for searching complex buildings and structures, including advanced ground-penetrating radar systems and thermal imaging equipment that could detect hidden spaces behind walls and under floors. These tools have since been used in numerous missing person investigations, helping to locate victims who might otherwise have remained hidden for years. David Chen channeled his experience into advocacy work focused on improving security measures at shopping centers and other public spaces where children and teenagers congregate. His efforts helped establish new standards for access control in commercial buildings and requirements for more comprehensive monitoring of service areas and maintenance corridors. The changes that resulted from Sarah's case represented a concrete legacy of her brief life, practical improvements that would help protect other children from similar fates. But for her parents, no amount of legislative reform or technological advancement could fill the void left by their daughter's absence. In quiet moments, Linda Chen would sometimes find herself wondering what Sarah would have become if she had been allowed to grow up. Would she have pursued her interest in photography? Would she have continued playing violin? Would she have gone to college, gotten married, had children of her own? These questions would never have answers. But they served as a reminder of the life that had been stolen not just from Sarah, but from everyone who had loved her. The girl who had dreamed of becoming a photographer had instead become a symbol of the importance of protecting children from those who would harm them. As the years passed, Sarah's story became part of the curriculum at police academies and training programs for security professionals. Her case was studied as an example of the importance of thorough investigation techniques and the need to consider all possible hiding places when searching for missing persons. The memorial park that replaced the mall became a place where law enforcement officers from around the country would come to pay their respects and to remind themselves of the importance of their work. A small plaque near the memorial stone contained a quote from Detective Morrison. "Every missing child deserves the same dedication we gave to Sarah. No case is too old, no lead is too small, and no family should have to wait 18 years for answers." The park also served as a gathering place for the annual Sarah's Walk, a fundraising event organized by the Chen family to support missing children organizations. The walk traced the route that Sarah had taken from her home to the mall on that fateful day in July 2007, ending at the memorial stone where participants would observe a moment of silence in her memory. The event drew hundreds of participants each year, including families of other missing children, law enforcement officers, and community members who wanted to honor Sarah's memory. The walk served as both a tribute to Sarah and a reminder of the ongoing need for vigilance in protecting children from predators. As Detective Morrison reflected on the case during his retirement, he often spoke about the importance of never giving up hope, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Sarah's case had taught him that the truth could remain hidden for years, but that persistent investigation and new technologies could eventually bring even the most carefully concealed crimes to light. The discovery of Sarah's body and the resolution of her case had provided closure for the Chen family, but it had also raised important questions about how many other victims might be hidden in forgotten spaces throughout the country. The investigation had revealed that David Kellerman was not unique. There were other predators who used their knowledge of building layouts and security systems to conceal their crimes. The realization led to the development of new investigative protocols specifically designed to search for hidden spaces in commercial and institutional buildings. These protocols have since been used in numerous cases, leading to the discovery of other victims who had been concealed in walls, basements, and forgotten rooms. Sarah's case also highlighted the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining active investigation files even in cases that have gone cold. The purse that had remained hidden in the mall's walls for 18 years contained crucial evidence that ultimately led to the solution of the case, but only because investigators had maintained detailed records of Sarah's belongings and had been able to immediately recognize the significance of the discovery. The lesson was clear. No case should ever be considered truly closed until all questions have been answered and all evidence has been found. Sarah's family had waited 18 years for answers, but their persistence and the dedication of investigators had ultimately been rewarded with the truth. The truth, however, came with its own burden. Learning what had happened to Sarah provided closure, but it also forced the Chen family to confront the reality of their daughter's final hours. The knowledge that she had been held captive, that she had suffered, and that she had died alone in a hidden room beneath the mall was almost harder to bear than the uncertainty they had lived with for so many years. But the family found strength in the knowledge that Sarah had tried to leave evidence of her captor's identity, that even in her final moments she had been thinking about how to help investigators find the truth. The note with David Kellerman's name represented Sarah's final act of courage, a message that had waited 18 years to be discovered, but had ultimately led to the resolution of her case. The note also served as a reminder of Sarah's intelligence and resourcefulness. Despite being held captive by a dangerous predator, she had found a way to leave behind evidence that would eventually lead to the truth. Her actions had not only solved her own case, but had also helped prevent David Kellerman from claiming additional victims. As the Chen family continued to process their grief and work toward healing, they found comfort in the knowledge that Sarah's story had made a difference. The changes in law enforcement procedures, the improvements in building security, and the increased awareness of predatory behavior had all resulted from the investigation into their daughter's disappearance. Sarah Chen had been 13 years old when she left home for ice cream on a hot July afternoon in 2007. She had been excited about the summer, looking forward to starting high school in the fall, and dreaming about her future as a photographer. Her life had been full of promise and potential, and her death had left a void that could never be filled. But her story had not ended with her death. The 18-year search for answers had transformed her case into a symbol of hope for other families facing similar tragedies. The investigation had led to important improvements in law enforcement techniques and building security measures, and her memory continued to inspire those who worked to protect children from predators. The mall where Sarah had spent her final hours was gone, replaced by a memorial park where families could gather to remember her and to reflect on the importance of community vigilance. The building that had hidden her secret for 18 years had been torn down, but the lessons learned from her case would endure. In the end, Sarah Chen's legacy was not defined by the tragedy of her death, but by the hope and determination her story had inspired. She had left home for ice cream on a summer afternoon, but the mall had never let her leave. Someone had made sure the walls kept their secret for 18 years. But walls, no matter how thick, cannot contain the truth forever, And sometimes, when those walls finally crumble, they reveal not just hidden tragedies, but the enduring power of love, hope, and the human determination to seek justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Sarah Michelle Chen rests now in Riverside Cemetery, her grave marked by a simple headstone surrounded by flowers that are refreshed regularly by family members, friends, and strangers who have been touched by her story. The inscription reads simply, "Beloved daughter, friend, and inspiration, your light continues to shine." And in the memorial park where the mall once stood, children play on swings and slides while their parents watch carefully, reminded by Sarah's story of the precious nature of innocence and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The girl who went for ice cream and never came home had finally found her way back to the community that had never stopped looking for her story serving as both a warning and a beacon of hope for all who would listen.